Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. It's been a long time. Welcome to the CertiCraft. We're back after half a year-ish, somewhere there. I kind of needed a break personally after a year and a half of doing it every other week, and also started working on a bunch of stuff behind the scenes that we're going to get into here that demanded a lot of time and energy. So what was supposed to be a 1 or 2 month pause became an extended 6-month pause. But now, kind of the fruits of all that labor that both myself and our guests here have been putting in is starting to emerge. Kind of got a bit more capacity again. So this CertiCraft is back, baby. We got lots of guests coming up, and excited about the curation that's happening this year. Before introducing our guests and getting into the meat of our discussion here today, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. I live in Nelson, BC, and this place here is the traditional ancestral territories and unceded ancestral territories of the Snakes people, and through intermarriage, the Tanaha people. When I first moved to Nelson 3 years ago, there was a distinct lack of Indigenous people here, and I was like very confused for a while. I kept asking people like, "Hey, why don't I see anybody Indigenous here? Why don't I see anybody Indigenous here?" Eventually, like a year into being here, I found somebody actually in the cannabis industry too. What's her name? Stephanie from Trimmer Group. I forget what they're called. Green something.
Green Team.
Do you know, sir? Green Team, yeah, Stephanie from Green Team. Yeah, she works with one of the Sinaiax elders here, and she was like, "Oh, the reason you don't see any Indigenous people here is because they're all killed. There's major massacres here. There's a scalping program, and the population here went from thousands to less than 10." And that's a really sad story, and it's a reality in a lot of different places in Canada. And I think any steps towards meaningful reconciliation involves first learning about what actually happened to the first peoples on the land that you're on. So wherever you're coming from here today, I very much encourage you to learn about what the history is of the land that you're on and the people that were there before settlers came here, as a first step to any kind of meaningful reconciliation. So with that sad mood being set, let's shift gears here and bring our guests into a fuller screen here. Hi, Jacqueline, David, and Sarah. Really stoked to have you guys here today. So myself, Jacqueline, David, and Sarah are all pretty heavily involved in 4 of the most active cannabis policy organizations here in BC. Since I'm talking, I'll introduce kind of myself and the Kootenay Cannabis Council first, and then I'll ask each of our guests to kind of do the same. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to each introduce ourselves, our organization, why our organization exists, what it is that we are focused on as like our primary missions this year, like what the most current topics are that really affect our membership. And then after we've given you each a sense of who we are as individuals and representatives of individual organizations, then we'll shift gears into talking about this new kind of it's been under wraps organization for a while, and we're going public, baby. All right. Oh yeah, I guess some housekeeping stuff. I see the chat is already being used quite a bit. That's great. If you guys are here, we like it when it's interactive, so say hi in the chat. If you have any questions, there's a dedicated questions tab. Go there, ask your questions there, and you can upvote the questions that you like. And at the end, we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A, and we'll go through questions in order of popularity. Excited to have you all here today. I'm excited that there's quite a few people from government here today. I'm feeling pretty positive about how kind of the relationship with government's shifting. And let's get into it. Okay. Here we go. So I'm Sami, CEO of CertiCraft. We're on a mission to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive in the industry. And that mission is pretty broad, which is why things like this are created and why we are involved with cannabis policy advocacy, because the policy landscape is still problematic today, and for us to succeed in our mission, that has to shift. That's kind of why CertiCraft is really focused on policy in a big way. And here in the Kootenays, where I live, historically is tons and tons of craft growers. There, within Nelson, within 200 kilometers of Nelson, there's 3,000 different operations that have been here traditionally. And, 2,500 of those had a medical license. 2,000 of those were planning to get licensed on day one of legalization. And most of those people have had their hopes and dreams dashed by a regulatory environment that's not inclusive and not accessible. Out of 2,000 people that were planning to get licensed today, I think it's like 15 or 20 that have. So it's a pretty massive difference between what the hope was versus what the reality is. So that's why the Kootenay Cannabis Council exists, because that is a major problem. The cannabis industry here is represented between 30 to 50% of the local economy, which is massive. It's been what's always kept people afloat when the resource industries and the various other industries that exist here have faltered. And the Kootenays are going to get hit really hard if cannabis can't successfully transition. So the Kootenay Cannabis Council is a collective of service providers like ourselves, license holders in the world of cannabis, as well as local government, both we have city councilors from different local municipalities and people from regional districts here, all working together to create the change needed to allow the local population to be able to actually enter and thrive in the market. So that's kind of what the Kootenay Cannabis Council is all about. And our biggest issues right now, I'd say, is making direct delivery accessible and farm status, and allowing people who farm a crop to be considered a farm, because that's has led to a lot of bullshit situations for cannabis farmers here in the area. Jacqueline, you're to my right here. I'll just go clockwise. So Jacqueline, do you want to go next, introduce yourself and your organization?
For sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jacqueline Pahota. I'm the Executive Director at the Retail Cannabis Council of British Columbia. So we are a nonprofit society that represents privately held licensed cannabis retailers across BC. 57 unique operators, which is about 130 stores across the province. So our mandate is to ensure that our private retailers have the tools that they need to be sustainable and competitive in market. Specifically, I should have done my land acknowledgement before I started, actually. I'm located in Vancouver. So our head office is on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Salish peoples. Squamish peoples.
Squamish.
So apologies for not doing that first. But yeah, so RCCBC, we represent stores across the province. We are made up of a volunteer board of directors. And as I said, our mandate is to make sure that we have the tools that we need. So, those tools are obviously, focused on things like ensuring that we have a thriving direct supply, direct delivery environment, ensuring that the economic burdens that the retailers are bearing are not, overly onerous. And then obviously things like consumption and events licensing is top of mind for our retailers. And then something that is definitely not top of mind for anybody else on this phone call, if I'm not mistaken, is actually some licensing density considerations for retailers, because unlike our fine folks in production, we were able to, do that, relatively successful transition of retail environments, as well as, a number of new entrants into the market. And that has created, scenarios where we do see over density of licensing because of, municipal considerations. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jacqueline. David, you're next on my screen in the clockwise direction.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Happy New Year to you. Always a pleasure to be anywhere with Jacqueline and Sarah. So nice to see them too. You too, Sami. Well.
I was going to say, not me.
And you too. I would just echo the land acknowledgements as well, and how privileged we are to be on the unceded territory. My name is David Herford. I'm the secretary for the BC Craft Farmers Co-op. And we've been operating now for about 3 years, 2.5 of them virtually, essentially, during the pandemic. Our mission is to transition as many farmers into the legal system as possible, like the others, like Sami's and Sarah's as well. It's to keep BC the global leader for cannabis, to keep this brand this culture that is very special and unique in the world, that can bring a lot of economic and social benefits to our communities. And then to make sure consumers have access in the legal market to the best product, and that is the product grown by small BC farmers who are passionate about their craft. So that's our mission. In terms of top 2 or 3 priorities, I've noticed in the first part of our mission was to transition farmers. More and more of our role is to help the farmers that have already transitioned, because they are struggling. And that's a big problem, a really big problem for people who are fans of legalization. It's a very big problem for the government, because now we have our first group of people who bought in, said, yep, we're going to get on the side of the government and be on the good side. And now observers are watching, and it's been about 3-4 years now, so we have pretty good data. And the picture is not rosy. There is not any incentive, I think, now for people to really make this transition in a big way. So I think that where we hoped we would be making a lot more progress, I think there is this feeling now that people are not even going to try, and now they have evidence. So our work is more and more now helping the people who have got in to try and find a way. Because there's so many obstacles in the system from the government and from other areas. So I think that that's certainly something that we're more focused on: service delivery, coming up with better ways of pooling resources around direct sales and farm gate and these other policies that are happening. Obviously, advocacy. We aren't here today without advocacy. The government never wanted to legalize cannabis. They never wanted to do it for medical reasons back in the day, despite their commitments to public health and compassion. And they certainly didn't want to do it here. So it's only advocacy that has gotten us this far. And sometimes that's a political leader making a decision, or it's a court making a ruling. So even though we've got legalization, we know there's a long way to go. And in fact, it's not looking good. So I think this will continue to be our priorities over the year. The federal side, of course, the Cannabis Act review, which is, again, doesn't give people a lot of hope. We're pushing hard for interim measures. Waiting 2 years for the results of a review with an election in between is just a recipe for nothing to happen. So we've been putting pressure on to see some interim measures to help the sector survive. Provincially, it's trying to get the provincial government on board to convince the federal government that their policies are really hurting our economy. I've been shocked that the provincial government has not stood up for our economy and stood up for their constituencies, because this industry is as big as wine. It's as big as the film industry if it really gets going. So I think convincing the BC government that we need to get Ottawa to change their attitude, or our industry here is going to continue to die, and we will lose. We will absolutely lose. Ontario is very aggressive on the agriculture side and the farming side. So I think that's important. The other government pieces, I think, are the municipal governments, particularly around the farm gate requirements, and the Indigenous governments, where I think the action really is going to be at. And I think if there's any hope in the sector, to me, it is the activity that's going on inside Indigenous governments and organizations that are starting to look at controlling their own destiny in terms of economic development. The last thing that we're working on, of course, is the BC Cannabis Summit. We had a lot of success last year, thanks to the various organizations, in terms of hosting one of the first in-person events after COVID. It's a really good vibe. A lot of people said that this really was the authentic cannabis industry that they've been looking for. Nothing against the folks that are organizing LIFT and other conferences, but we seem to really strike a chord. And we had Jacqueline, of course, which made a big difference. So we're doing that again. And that was a real catalyst in terms of getting the government of Canada to, in hindsight, expand the scope of the Cannabis Act review. It was a real turning point. And to bring the community together in person, I think, was the most important thing. To see that despite the fact that there's a lot of struggle, that there is a community, and that that people are not alone, that there is folks out there. So I think that will be a major effort for us in terms of trying to get the community together and to share experiences. So that's what we're looking forward to, Sami, and congratulations to you on your success and starting the series again this year. We're happy to be part of it.
You're welcome. Yeah, and I'll ask you and Jacqueline to share more about the summit again at the end before we wrap up. And Sarah, before I turn it over to you, I realized while David was talking, another major issue for the Kootenay Cannabis Council is the excise duty program and getting that reformed. And just wanted to flag that because I was only thinking provincially because of the topic that we're talking about today, not federally. But on to you, Sarah. I'd love to hear about yourself and the Craft Cannabis Association of BC and about your kitty cat.
This is Kato. He's one of two. Yeah, they're amazing cats, and so grateful to have them over COVID. Oh my gosh. So thanks for having me, Sami, and for having us all here today. Happy New Year to everybody who's watching, listening. My name is Sarah Campbell. I'm a director of the Craft Cannabis Association of BC. I'm coming to you. I reside on Vancouver Island, on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and specifically the traditional territory of the Cowichan tribes. I think the largest tribe in British Columbia. So this is an important region. It has always been an important region for cannabis. I think we have really quite the connection with the Kootenays and have for decades. So our nonprofit association we're a nonprofit society formed in 2016. So we're coming on 7 years here. And we were formed to support small-scale independent cannabis businesses, provide a forum for information, education, discussion, and guidance for the industry, provide extension-related services for small-scale cannabis producers, and support the development of standards, regulations, and policies. We've been working really hard to ensure the emerging industry is inclusive, sustainable, and poised to support economic growth across the country, and it certainly has not been easy.
No, it has not.
So our focus for the last couple of years, I would say at least, has been on the two programs that our province has adopted, thankfully, direct delivery and farm gate. And there's lots of challenges that exist, especially with the farm gate program. One of them being the different levels of government and the complexities that, the new definition of cannabis as agriculture or not as agriculture. There's some inconsistencies within our province. And really when we roll out a program like the farm gate program, you have your municipalities that are quite key in how it's actually rolled out across the province. So we have been working closely with municipalities from the beginning. We host the only cannabis reception at the Union of BC Municipalities, which provided an opportunity for us to have discussions with local governments as the cannabis policies were rolled out from the beginning. Through COVID, the UBCM did not happen in person. It was an online event, and it was run okay, but it didn't provide the opportunities to really see people in person and have those super effective discussions. So we're looking forward to this year. I think the UBCM will be in person again, and should be in Vancouver. So that's going to be a great opportunity for our group here, hopefully, to have some important discussions. And what we did over the last year and a bit, we decided we needed some data from the legal industry, because as David mentioned, so far, there have been many folks who've transitioned, and they're having a tough time. Originally, many years ago, we were also trying to transition folks into the legal industry, similar to the work that the Community Futures did in the Kootenays. And very quickly, we realized that it was we were bringing people into an unhealthy market. And so we conducted a study at the end of 2020 of cannabis businesses within the Cowichan Valley. This study is soon to be published, but what it does, and I think what we need to consider doing across the industry, is get a baseline of data that we can then support our policy recommendations moving forward. And so in that study, the year that we did the study, businesses the producers were not profitable. There might have been one producer that was profitable. The retailers were, I think, I can't remember the exact numbers, but most of them were also not profitable. But they were looking forward to this year potentially improving for both the producers and the retailers. We're hoping to be able to conduct that study again to see where we're at approximately 2 years later. And, you know, this is the kind of work that I think we need to be doing just so that the folks at all levels of government can see where the industry is moving, the difficulties we're having, and give us some ammunition, if you will, for the need to provide support services, for example. One other thing we've been really working on over the last couple of years is, you know, moving the dial of stigma around cannabis production. And that's important to do, I think, at the level of consumers, the public, but also within government. And so we've submitted a number of grant applications for a variety of projects. We were successful last year, and we will be conducting our second regenerative cannabis workshop in the Kootenays this time. We did one in Metchosin last summer. And this is funded in partnership with the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, so a federal, provincial, and territorial initiative. And it wasn't easy to get to this stage, you know, and to get to the point where the folks who are reviewing grant applications are comfortable approving a cannabis project, you know, and seeing cannabis businesses as part of every other type of industry moving forward. And so the first workshop we did in the Metchosin was a great success. We had government there auditing us, and we had several licensed producers there, as well as others within just the agricultural community. The one we're going to be conducting in the Kootenays is at the end of February. We're getting ready to put out some social media about it. Anyone who is interested in agriculture, cannabis, what regenerative cannabis might look like is invited. We've partnered with Che LeBlanc from Rosebud Cannabis Farms. Shannon Ross will be presenting from Antidote Processing, and Kelly Dunn and Josh from Dragonfly Earth Medicine. They will also be presenting. And so what we're also trying to do is just like build out the community, look forward to what sustainable cannabis production looks like. And we have experts in the industry. You know, both Che and Kelly have been producing regenerative cannabis for decades. And so, you know, there's just an incredible wealth of knowledge. And I think our industry just needs a little bit of support over the next couple of years. And we know we can be great. But yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks. Thank you, all of you, for being here today and for doing the great work and necessary work if we want to have any chance at having an industry where small independent farmers and retailers have any chance at succeeding, or just even breaking even. Let's set the bar. Let's set the bar that low initially. Like even that is like not a guaranteed right now. You know, Jacqueline was telling us before we went on air how like in the past week may I share this, Jacqueline? Or
yeah, of course.
Yeah, how in the past week, like a few of their members are selling their business now. They've like kind of given up on trying to make that happen, and there's been just this huge uptick compared to you know, 2 people over the course of years to now 3 people in 1 week. So you know, people are struggling. You know, it's we've been fighting for years at this point to make policy changes because businesses are going to shut down. The government has been very slow to respond, and the measures that have been put in place have not actually met the needs so far. And now we're kind of seeing the results that we've been warning about for years, and it's people are shutting down on both the production and the retail side. And all of our collective hope here is that we can move the needle fast enough that we can avoid more people shutting down. Like these are like amazing jobs that are supporting all kinds of communities across BC. There's the potential for tens of thousands of more jobs in a matter of just a couple of years. Like this is not a small not a small amount of economic opportunity here. And if the policies are done in collaboration with the industry in a manner that actually meets all the needs and allows people to thrive, like this is such a huge economic boon to the BC economy and to BC society. So that's kind of, I think, what it really boils down to for all of us is just there's a huge opportunity, there's a huge amount of passion, and it's being squandered right now. And we want to make it so that instead of squandering it, we actually reach the potential and put BC Bud back on the map as the flagship cannabis brand globally, which it has been for a very long time. And soon it won't be if we don't actually get our act together. And I guess to shift gears into kind of this newer organization we've been working on, it came out of one of the last CertiCrafts that we had in the summer. I invited Jacqueline, I invited Kelly Coulter, who's an advisor to the Craft Cannabis Association of BC, and I invited Bruce Acton, who has zero relationship with cannabis, but has done a lot of policy advocacy work in Ottawa and in provincial governments in very different domains, who has just a very different perspective on this. And the intention there was to have a brainstorm on direct delivery specifically. Direct delivery is a program that has the potential to solve distribution completely for BC, and it does not currently. The BCLDB in their year and a half of working on it had an attitude of we know better than you, we don't care about your opinion. That's kind of just the attitude they exuded, and it was really problematic. It was really disappointing to have the BC government tell the BCLDB, hey, distribution is a problem. It's one of the biggest problems we have right now. We need you to create this new program to enable small-scale farmers and small-scale retailers to actually succeed, and to then not be included in the conversation as if doing that same thing again as the first time that the distribution policy was set would make things different. So that was really disappointing, and we had a CertiCraft to specifically talk about, okay, what can we do to force the BCLDB to actually listen, actually do a good job, actually create policy that enables people to thrive. And there were a lot of great ideas that we discussed in that meeting, and two of them seemed to have like the biggest potential to make a big difference. And so I made it my personal mission for the summer to make those things happen. And what those two things were was first creating a technical advisory panel, as it's called, within BCLDB for cannabis. There is such an apparatus in the alcohol industry where essentially alcohol operators have regular meetings with the BCLDB and collaboratively set policy. I can't speak to the actual level of collaboration or like how much give and take there is, but there is a formal apparatus to have meaningful conversation and collaboratively create new policies. And that's just something that's been lacking with cannabis, because anytime any of our organizations have been like, hey, this is important, we've just been completely ignored. That's historically kind of what it's felt like. The other thing was to create a interministerial, I forget what the term was, but essentially a regular meeting that has representatives from each of the ministries in the BC government that touch cannabis. Because another issue that all of us have struggled with is, we'll go to the Ministry of Finance, we'll go to the LCRB, we'll go to whatever organization and be like, hey, this is an issue that we're dealing with. Can you guys help us with it? And very often there's this accountability being moved on to another ministry. Oh, that's not our file, go to that organization. And when there's 6 or 7 different ministries and organizations in the government that touch cannabis, that's led to this it's just very hard to actually get anything to happen. I guess the third thing was to officially have a unified voice for the craft cannabis industry in BC, because that was always given as an excuse for not doing things, even though we very much were in alignment on what we were saying. So yeah, my mission kind of became, let's create a thing that addresses those three things together. So I reached out to the three lovely folks that you see here today, as well as a few others that aren't here right now. These podcasts are limited to 4 people total, myself included, which is why we don't have more people here right now. And kind of just brought up this suggestion, like, hey, why don't we do these things and actually like make this happen? And thankfully, everybody you see on this call here was really stoked to make it happen. And we've been meeting every other week for the past half year. David Herford here suggested that we actually share the letter that we shared with David Eby, our current premier, who at the time was the premier designate, that kind of kicked off a lot of what we've been doing. I, alongside Shannon Ross, who Sarah just mentioned, who's also part of the Kootenai Cannabis Council. In fact, she is it's her brainchild. She spearheaded that whole project. The two of us met with David Eby before he became premier and kind of discussed what we were working on. He was super supportive and excited to hear that we were making this happen. Maybe I'll pause here, guys. Do you think, like, does anybody else want to say something before I, like, because I'm just like going off on my own here, like should I share this letter? Is there a more context that you guys want to add first? I don't want this to be like Sami dominating the conversation. Like, where are you guys at? What do you think is the right approach to take here?
I think we can summarize the content of the letter in a way that would probably be more interesting than going through like a granular document line by line for the listeners.
I did. Yeah, I meant more share so that people can download it and look at it in their own time if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean that. I don't think there'd be anything wrong with that at all. I think we should talk about some of the contents of that letter, though, Sami, and specifically what we were looking for when we approached, LDB and the LCRB with this proposal. I think that would be interesting.
Sure. Do you wanna take that on while I upload this document here?
For sure. So my experience at RCCBC with our regulators has been a little bit different than the experience I think on the producer side. We've had the good luck to have open ears in many of the concerns surrounding.
Sorry, one second, Jacqueline. For the people in the audience, can you download this, or is it just like sharing it in this kind of? Can somebody like say something on the chat?
Are you able to download?
Yeah, because I can't tell from my end what the audience experience is like.
You just put a link in your site, Sami, and
Just
then
sharing.
put a
Okay.
link in the chat if you want.
Yeah, you know what? I'll stop sharing here because I don't want to take this away, and I'll put it on our Google Drive and I'll share a link like David's suggestion. Take it away, Jacqueline. I'm gonna go back to what I was doing here.
So yeah, as I was saying, like our experience with RCCBC, we had the good fortune of establishing a relatively strong dialogue early on in the process of legalization in BC, and something that we in that conversation and collaboration, obviously the province's focus has been on the things that are under their purview, specifically like distribution, retail licensing, etc. And I think that part of the challenge is that that's not unfortunately sufficient. And it's not necessarily fair the way that we have bifurcated the regulations surrounding this sector. It makes it extremely challenging. But I think that a big and important step with this letter and the working group that we're talking about is incorporating both the retail and the production voices in the same conversation, instead of trying to have these conversations that are separate. Because I think that has been something that has been a challenge, is that my retailers cannot be healthy without healthy producers. That is a fact of the matter, right? Like our consumers will not, they won't participate in the legal market if our producers aren't healthy and producing the product that they want. So I think that's a real, I think it's a really important step to get everybody into the same room and to talk about, not what we have, not the, kind of the approach that we've been taking thus far, but what does the, real data on the ground look like, after 4 years of legalization. You know what I mean? This has been an industry that was, built on kind of a speculative assumptions, because we had no meaningful data to draw from. Then that's nobody's fault. That is just a fact of the matter. But that is changing. We now have, data that we can point to that's solid. And I think that should become more of a focus, as Sarah pointed out, right? because I do think that, part of the challenge that we faced with this sector in the beginning was, and I think that this remains a challenge, the perception of our industry from government. So this idea that, cannabis, businesses were licensed to print money, watching, publicly traded companies with $5 billion market caps, rise to prominence and then, fall on their faces, if you'll forgive me. But I mean, that is the impression, like that 2018, speculative bubble energy, I think remains kind of the perception of our sector for a lot of our elected officials and potentially our regulators as well. And that was never real. Like that was never the reality of the sector. It was never going to reflect what the Canadian cannabis sector was going to look like in the future and the boots on the ground. The reality is this is a sector that's made up of, literally thousands and thousands of small businesses across the province and across the country. And those small businesses are in trouble. That is just a fact of the matter. And, I find it really challenging when we're having these conversations, because the things that I get, from government a lot of the time and from, our regulators is that, well, we'll let the free market sort it out, right? Like, we'll let the free, and I think that that's really unfair because we have so much intervention and barriers to entry and regulatory burden that there is no meaningful free market in this circumstance. And I think that, part of the conversation is rationalizing what that means for producers, processors, distributors, and retailers in the supply chain. And I think that, this conversation bringing, potentially bringing our partners from like agriculture, finance, and the Solicitor General's office all together to have those conversations in a holistic way, with the existing environment that we're facing right now is, I think, a really important step. And I think, like I said, I've always felt that the separation between production and retail is one that is not, it's a fiction. It's a fallacy, right? And then the other thing I would say about, the potential here is we do have, established businesses now, right? We have people in the sector who are, leading in the legal space. They are, people who have a strong voice. They are people who should, I believe, be credible to government. And I think that those voices are, led by organizations like David's at BCCF and Sarah's at the Craft Cannabis Association should be the focus of, these kinds of consultations and, really brought into the conversation in a way that considers the economic health of the businesses as opposed to strictly, a public health and safety angle. And I think that we have done an incredible job on public health and safety. I think that there is, we saw that report that came out where we've seen youth access drop. We've seen no increase in driving under the influence, meaningful increase in those activities, which were huge concerns, right? Those were a lot of the driving factors behind the regulatory framework that we ended up with. And since, those things did not materialize, now I think it is appropriate for us to say, okay, we've got public health and safety on lock. Let's look at the economic benefits. And I think that, part of the challenge here is trying to, the line is, convince government to step away from revenue that they're currently earning. And I think that obviously that is challenging, but there are changes that we could make to our tax structure and to the fee structures in the cannabis sector that would result in long-term revenue being, significantly increased for a relatively, short-term, or rather a relatively small changes in the grand scheme of things, I think is the best way to put it. So, that's kind of my thoughts on, where we're going to go with this provincial conversation, really, and also integrating, I think, having that conversation with the LDB and the LCRB and all these other, folks who have different mandates. That's the other challenge. We're the only province that I'm aware of off the top of my head in Canada that has two ministries involved in cannabis regulation. Everybody else is under Ministry of Finance. We share it with Solicitor General and Ministry of Finance. So that's, again, a very unique BC situation, and it requires unique made in BC solutions in order to make it a viable situation. And I think that translates well to the Cannabis Act, the federal review, which I will actually stop talking now and maybe let David or Sarah jump in.
Easy for all of us to just wax poetic for solo. I mean, you guys can all tell we're clearly really passionate about this, and thankfully so far, myself and Jacqueline have both noticed. Oh yeah, I'm talking for a while. Let me stop and let somebody else talk.
I just want to add to what Jacqueline's been saying. I think what we're trying to do here is just have a bit of a coordinated approach. I also think that we've had great success with, in particular, the Ministry of Agriculture has been quite supportive of listening to our standpoint in supporting small scale producers in particular, the future of the direct delivery program and Farmgate. They supported our grant applications to produce, the regenerative conferences. And I think that the Ministry of Finance and their approach has been very geared toward big business. That's how the industry was rolled out. Even though we said time and again that the industry in BC was based on small scale producers, it's now coming to light that, well, maybe that was true, and maybe when we talk about quality and experience and everything, it does come down to the small scale producers. And so but it's really hard to shift a business model from one that deals with big alcohol and their whole distribution system is based around that type of service to small batch. So I think together, in certain meetings we've had, there have been other ministries present, but they've been sort of, just listening and sort of behind the scenes. And I think what we're asking here is for there to be a bit more of a coordinated approach from their side as well, their side of the table, and for us to all be aware of who's there and who's working on sort of the next stage of things. And hopefully we will be looking at more of an economic development approach for BC.
Yeah, I would just add and I enjoy listening to the conversation, so it's great. I think for us, the EB letter is a cry for leadership, right? It is a pleading, and because we know in cannabis that we don't get anywhere without some political leadership. That's how we've gotten where we are today. And as I said earlier, and if that doesn't happen, then there's a legal challenge. And in this case right now, the Competition Bureau, I know, is looking very closely at the reality of Canada's cannabis industry and the fact that it does seem to be controlled by a very small number of people who seem to have very good relations with the regulators and the governments. So, there may be more to come in terms of legal efforts if politicians and elected officials don't show leadership. That's what we pay them to do. And so our hope is, and I think Sami indicated, all of us have probably had some experience with Mr. EB along the way. I've had 30 years in terms of government policy in and around Vancouver, everywhere from the safe consumption site to medical cannabis, and Mr. EB has been a champion all along the way. So if he's not going to champion us, then we're really screwed. We are really screwed. He's got a lot of things on his plate, but the economy of the province is one of them, and he needs revenue to pay for our hospitals and our and our roads and our infrastructure and all those wonderful things that we all enjoy as citizens. So I hope that there will be leadership from the Premier. And I'm, again, surprised at how the BC government has really been, and Sarah's indicated there are pockets of support for us. But the BC government now has had 4 years to talk and talk and talk. But what have they actually done? They're undermining the sector. They're undermining their own sector, which makes it impossible for us to get anywhere in Ottawa when the BC government isn't even on our side. Direct sales, they're still charging a 15% handling fee for not handling the product. Everyone I talk to says it's like a mob. It's like a mob tax. So you got the BC government kind of almost, acting in a way that is just punitive to people. It makes no sense. The Farmgate application process could have been written by Health Canada. It is very complicated and cumbersome and suggests that they haven't been listening at all. There's no consumption policy with Farmgate. They've had 2 years. So when, our own, the finance department is writing people now and telling them, sorry, you can't claim that $90,000 tax credit because cannabis is not an agriculture activity. Imagine getting that letter first of all, they're denying your profession, that you are actually a farmer when you are. It's a key part of your identity. And they're pulling $90,000 out of your bank account. This is the government that is supposed to be on our side.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not.
I recognize that there are challenges, though, right? Like there
They just aren't. So I think at some point, talk is cheap, right? Actions speak louder than words. And I think that what we want Mr. Eby to do, and I think the new finance minister holds a tremendous amount of promise as well. I have had the privilege of working near Minister Conroy for other files in my career, and she is one of the best elected officials I've ever met in my life. She's from the Kootenays, so she understands the fabric of the cannabis culture to rural communities. So I'm hopeful that we will get out of our joint effort finally political leadership at the highest levels of the BC government for an industry that is a vital part of our future, and a vital part of the future of Indigenous communities in this province as well. You know, the BC government has done some good work with Indigenous governments in terms of trying to come up with that a good relationship that fits. That certainly deserves a lot of credit, and I think that we can build more partnerships with Indigenous governments ourselves through our own organizations and through our own membership. So I think that there are lots of opportunities there, but they're not going to happen without leadership. And one of the reasons it's happening in the Indigenous governments is because their elected officials are showing leadership. And I think that's the difference maker.
Sorry for that, guys. My computer decided to shut down. Back now.
Sorry, before we move forward, Sammy, I wanted to expand on David's thought really quickly. In my experience working with, our regulators, I have found them to be, people who are sympathetic and, to some extent, very responsive in certain areas, right? Like within their purview. And I think that that's what you're hearing from David is the frustration with the fundamental flaws in the framework, right? There are things about the legislation federally that are dysfunctional so fundamentally as to be almost insurmountable on the production and processing side. I believe that is a true fact of the matter. And I think that, when we talk about, BC being at the table, we're talking about BC being at the table, from an elected official perspective, pushing our other federal elected officials to encourage Ottawa to make these very, very fundamental changes. Because things I don't think we were talking about this specifically, David, but I think the excise tax is a really good example of something that is absolutely top of mind for all producers and processors. And that is not something that the sector is going to be able to necessarily move the needle on effectively, because the appearance is one of self-interest, but in reality, the motivating factor behind that is sustainability. Forget about profitability. I just want to keep my doors open.
It's existential, more than sustainable.
I'd add to that, though. The excise tax is a very complicated issue. We put in front very simple solutions, like even just doubling the cap size for a micro farmer from 2,100 square feet to 4,200 square feet. That's
allowing people to use security clearances before they have to build their darn building.
Move the security clearance to the front of the process. Simple, get rid of the 30-gram limit. Change the edible rules. Very simple things that they can do, literally in this session of the House. We saw the provincial government, I think, interject a little bit on sales licenses. We got movement on that quick. The provincial government has a lot of power to move the federal government on this issue. They're just choosing not to use it. So
there are things provincially, though, that we could be working on as well, like the farm status issue and taxation for cannabis agriculture, because we're not considered farms, is a real issue that I know that there's problems that need to be worked out at our level of government, but they need to be, doing that work, and we need to be pressuring them and hopefully seeing some movement on that as soon as possible.
Well, and you're absolutely correct, Sarah, because I think that work also ties into a lot of the technicalities around tourism and designations for cultivars and all sorts of other tools and that's exactly that's what we talk about, tools to make this sustainable. Those things are tied directly to the the opportunity that tourism presents to British Columbia, which we haven't even gotten into, right? Like I've been making the rounds of elected officials, like municipal officials rather, so mayor and council, because even after 4 years, there's still like a lot of misunderstanding, kind of they don't really get the potential for the sector until somebody sits down and says, hey, no, this isn't just about the primary activities of producing, processing, and retailing, but also there's all of these knockdown ancillary benefits from a tourism perspective that are just out of our reach because we lack things like event permitting, framework for consumption in any capacity. All of these things do tie back to what you're talking about in terms of farm status and recognizing cannabis for what it actually is.
And it is now, the time is now, because the tourism sector has been supported heavily by government since COVID. And so they're going to be exploding over the next few years, hopefully. And really, we'd like to see cannabis somewhere in that framework. We do have some light at the end of the tunnel with Brittany Anderson, MLA in Kootenay-Creston, being appointed as Parliamentary Secretary of Tourism. So that is huge, and it's part of her mandate to be looking at cannabis farms as part of the agritourism model, and it's that's her mandate. So hopefully we have some support with her in that position as well.
But we know. Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say that Ontario is really kicking our butt on this. And we're part of with Jacqueline's group and others of, I think Sarah as well, with the group called the Canadian Cannabis Tourism Alliance that's now forming in terms of really trying to develop a national destination tourism strategy for Canada. We have huge advantages as only G20 country and a safe tourist destination, especially we look at Mexico today. So it's a great opportunity, but again, being missed entirely by the province of British Columbia. The Niagara region, the premier has shown leadership in Ontario. Maybe it's because he has personal experience with cannabis as a younger person, but they are really moving quickly to make the Niagara region and other parts of Ontario the preeminent tourist attraction for cannabis in the country. And it's the government that is supporting that with hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm not talking about a $20,000 grant. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in tourism promotion. To the extent we can promote, and an active lobby in Ottawa to try and get the marketing rules changed so they can promote their industry. None of that is happening in British Columbia at all, which is really concerning because we have the best story. To have a Canadian cannabis tourism strategy is really a BC tourism strategy, because when people come to Canada, they're not going to Saskatchewan or Manitoba for cannabis. And until recently, they weren't going to Ontario for cannabis either. So again, this is where leadership is required. And I'm optimistic as well, Sarah, with Brittany's appointment, that we can get something done.
And on that note, to kind of shift into more positives, personally, I've been feeling a big shift in BC government since David Eby has come into power, and since there's been kind of change in some of the ministerial leadership. One other thing that we have done is we've reached out formally to the BC LDB and the Ministry of Finance around actually formally creating this technical advisory panel. And I'll share the letter that we sent for that in a bit here too. And I'll say that personally, I was surprised by kind of how this has gone forward. First off, they agreed within a week or two, which was great. But then the bit that's surprising me is that it's actually turning into more of that interministerial thing, where there are representatives from a bunch of different ministries, a bunch of different stakeholders. And I'll let Jacqueline speak a bit more to kind of how that conversation is going. But for me, it feels different. It feels like there's actual desire to meaningfully engage with us. And it makes me think we're the various bureaucrats that were working at the LDB, where they just hampered by decisions from above and they just couldn't actually engage. And now that maybe that thing that was shackling them before is gone, now they can actually engage with us in meaningful ways. I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but personally, I'm feeling very cautiously optimistic. Cautiously because it's been years of not having anything where we're taken seriously, but the optimism because it feels like things are different now. And we have a 2-hour meeting coming up later in January to really get into a lot of this stuff and bring up some of the issues. And for us as a group, we're committed to being really solution focused. We're not there to vent and rant about our issues. We're there to actually make real, concrete, simple suggestions that can be enacted on very quickly that would be transformative for the BC industry. That's our goal. We just want this to be as quickly as possible. Let's create an environment where the current license holders can thrive. And if the current license holders thrive, well, then everybody who's on the edge, who's been waiting, being like, I want to do this, but I'm not going to invest $500,000 to maybe break even like that. I'm not going to do that. If we can allow current people to thrive, then that's when the actual economic boon takes place, when everybody else who's sitting on the sidelines is like, okay, I think it's possible now. Jacqueline, do you want to maybe speak a bit to the experience with the LDB from your perspective and kind of how that conversation's been emerging?
For sure. So I think we need to clarify. So technical advisory panel is a very specific title. So that's not actually what we're pursuing. The technical advisory panel with liquor, just for everybody's edification, was implemented, I believe, because they were doing significant regulatory overhauls to the existing Liquor Act. And I think that during that consultation, they needed a specific regulatory technical panel in order to consult with the sector. So that was the context for that apparatus there. And this is a different situation. I think that this is focused more on establishing a regular communication channel and having a conversation about what transparent communication looks like and what accountability looks like to the various organizations in the sector looks like, which I think is really positive. I'm excited to have those conversations. I'm excited to hear from our civil servants and our elected officials, where they think we are. I think that will be very enlightening as well. And I think that will benefit the back and forth conversation, by facilitating, relationships that are, as we said, solution oriented. Right, because that's always been something that we've tried to focus on at our CCBC is there are I could spend a year yelling at you about all the things that are wrong, literally. There might be some people in the audience who have done that too. So instead of taking that approach, really focusing on these are the very straightforward, simple, prescriptive things that we could do tomorrow that would have meaningful changes in the lives of these people who are small business owners, British Columbians. And the thing is, these folks have invested in legalization. They took their money and their good faith, and they jumped in with both feet. And because they are mostly I was doing some sector surveys in the retail side of things. We have 444, I think it's 443 stores, independent stores in BC. 257 independent operators. The average person, the average store owner has 2.1 stores. These are real small businesses, and there are not a lot of sectors where that is the case, where the dominant part of the sector is the small business. We're 85% of the market, private retailers in BC. So to my mind, these are things that we need to reorient to those realities, and we need to adjust the way that we are. I think our expectations, I think government's expectations for the sector also need to be reoriented, because I think that there was an idea that there was going to be this really intense economic windfall regardless of what regulation looked like. Just legalizing cannabis was going to be enough. And I think that now it's time for us to engage with the reality that was not necessarily true. And I don't think that that's anybody's fault. I don't think that there's malice involved in this. This is something I tell my retailers all the time. It's not about people trying to be obstructionist. It is just unfortunately this narrative that has come forward has become a very convoluted, complicated one that has not been backed up by the expectations that people had when we originally went with legalization. And that's, I think, true for both government and the sector. Right. I think that a lot of the people who jumped in with both feet, this is not the sector that they thought that they were going to get when they went and became a legal retailer or a legal producer. Right. I just think that that's a fact of the matter.
Just a quick clarification for Cameron. I see you asked a question around consumption framework. We're not talking about like just general consumption. It's more about like having a space where you can have legal consumption. So let's say like a bar wanted to have an event that had cannabis on a patio, or somebody wanted to like rent part of an art gallery or a museum and have cannabis as part of it, or just anything that is not in your private home that has cannabis consumption, to have it be legal, to have a framework for that, so that we can share space publicly or in private establishments and have that be totally legal. That's more what that's talking about, which is critical for tourism to be successful. Like imagine like wine tours where you couldn't actually consume the wine. How that industry would fall apart. So it's same kind of thing here. You know, there has to be the ability to actually consume the cannabis for canna tourism to be an actual thing. For anybody else who has questions, please use that question tab. We are kind of probably approaching the end here. We have gone over time, which is fine by me. Jacqueline, David, Sarah, you guys have a bit more time to go, or do you have a hard stop coming up soon?
I have a little bit more time for you, always, Sammy.
Oh, thank you, Jacqueline. I'm gonna call you at 4 a.m. Quote you right now. David, Sarah, do you guys have any thoughts you want to add?
Well, I'll add, and I've got a little bit more time. I'm going on to National Tourism Alliance call after this, so I'll certainly provide some feedback. But I think, and there are things to be looking forward to for sure. I think the consumption policy, the lack of one here in BC, is a good example of where stigma is still living in the system. And I think Cameron's question suggested too, why do we need more frameworks? Isn't there already one for smoking? Which I think is a good point. Our approach to the provincial government, when they ask us for feedback, you give it to them, and then when they ignore you, I guess you just keep on providing them with feedback. But when you think of cannabis consumption, they're obviously concerned about intoxication. That's what they're the most concerned about, is going to the farm, smoking a bunch of weed, getting in your car, driving home, which is the same thing that every pub and every liquor establishment has in this province. It happens every hour of every day. So we felt it was just as simple to say, why not just adopt the rules for alcohol around consumption that you would for cannabis? Make it quite easy. Why this extra stigma around cannabis when alcohol kills hundreds of more people a year than cannabis does? So I think we see stigma living in these regulations. It's why you can see booze commercials on TV during prime time when kids are watching. It's why you're inundated with sports gambling, advertising now. All of these things are much more harmful to society than cannabis use. We all know that. We let 11-year-olds have smartphones for a generation. Now we see the results, right? In terms of mental health. These are all of our public health regulators allowing these things to happen. Fast food, which is creating obesity all over, is allowed to market to children everywhere. So I do think, consumption is a good example of where we're seeing a government really perpetuating stigma during regulations. But in this case, it's more problematic because the opportunity is so huge. It's so wonderful that we could be so proud to show off what we know about the province and about these farmers and about our culture. It makes it almost more troubling that the opportunity is so large. It's almost it's more troubling because the payoff is so big. If it was small, it probably wouldn't be as bad. So I think that we really need to try and work hard. And I think these organizations that you're looking at, others are fighting that stigma and winning every day. Sarah being able to get that grant means it'll be easier the next time that someone wants to go get that grant, and to let government know that we will challenge them respectfully. We'll make them think twice before they pass another rule that is going to get a lot of blowback. So I think that I'm optimistic in that regard, that these organizations and everyone in the sector will continue to fight because of the passion that they have for cannabis. So I'll add that. I before we go, Sammy, I wanted to make a mention of medical access, but we'll stop there, and then maybe if I'll let others speak on that other point.
Sarah, what do you think about consumption, tourism, etc.?
And you're muted right now, Sarah, just to FYI.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think cannabis it's an opportunity. You know, cannabis is a unique product. It's not alcohol, it's not tobacco. And so we talk about this, you know, a lot, in that sometimes there are existing programs that we can see would work for, you know, cannabis distribution or whatever the topic may be. Sometimes, I mean, cannabis as agriculture is an example where it fits the model of many other agricultural products. It's not unique. You know, we look at the food, what shit is it? I forget the actual act, but the Food and Agricultural Products Classification Act, you know, these things where it's just cannabis fits into that model. So in that way, we don't need a unique system, or we don't need to wait however many years for them to come up with a new system. But in some cases, cannabis consumption, it is kind of unique. And in another case, for cannabis distribution, it does not mimic alcohol. We have a product that cannot sit on the shelf forever. It needs to be, we need to have new, innovative, you know, all of our cultivars that we're able to produce regularly. Consumers like to have variety. Like, so we need unique programs. We also can fit into unique systems, but we need to look at cannabis with a different lens. And so I just think it is an opportunity to, it's not going to be easy because of the history of tobacco and inhalation, but there are studies, I think, that collectively, and it's something that BC, you know, we do need to do if we're going to really see the, you know, the potential of this industry realized, because smoking is an actuality. You know, I think we're talking about consumption on site at farm gate for sure, but we're also talking about consumption lounges. And we're not just talking about drinking drinks and edibles. We're talking about maybe vaping is the solution or whatever it is. But, you know, we need to be able to realize what our industry, you know, we could see where it was going pre-legalization. We need to kind of like get back there with the support of policies. So we're not just like, yes, there is no specific policy that doesn't, you know, not allow you to consume cannabis. And I know that it's sort of like, well, let's not build policies that then, you know, put us into a box. But at the same time, we're kind of living under the radar then. And we really want to be living above the radar, where it is, you know.
The whole point of legalization, to
Totally.
not hide. So.
And for consumers to understand fully, like, what, you know, what is expected and what they're able to do here.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Sarah, you hit the nail on the head in terms of, like, you know, that the like tobacco, alcohol kind of, you know, conversations, because that's really what happened. Federally, they regulated cannabis like tobacco, and then provincially, we tried to regulate it like liquor. And we're in
federally like tobacco and like pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah, yes. Well, yes, that is true. Oh, yeah, adding that as an additional fun layer on top.
Yeah.
What if tobacco could also cure cancer? No, I'm kidding. But, you know, so regardless, I think that that's actually a really insightful, like, again, talking about those like fundamental kind of like initial like original sins, if we will, of, you know, this kind of, you know, trying to transition the sector, which everybody was doing, and, you know, the best possible kind of like with the best possible intentions. And I think that, you know, it is not unreasonable that that was the response from people who had no, you know, who were building the bike while they were riding it. Because let's be real here, a 2-year time frame for legalizing a sector that was, you know, has been historically illegal for 60 to 100 years, depending on where you live, is quite a regulatory burden that you've taken on for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it made sense that they were going to try and crib from other sectors. But again, that kind of, to me, like, says, like, we need to rethink that. You know what I mean? It's just like, obviously, trying to regulate this product like tobacco or liquor is not necessarily having the results that we wanted it to, mm-hmm. from an economic development perspective, and also from, you know, other, you know, other like stated goals of legalization, you know, like eliminating the unregulated market, like all these things, you know what I mean? Like, we're not seeing, especially in British Columbia, we're still seeing, you know, a good 30% of our consumers, you know, choosing to use the, you know, the legacy market. So, I mean, like, again, like, you know, thinking about the very fundamental way that we have approached this product and how, you know, making assumptions and, you know, taking, you know, the lead and like really ossifying these things in other like controlled substances spaces is, you know, really, it's not working. That's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
David, you said you wanted to talk about medical.
I was going to bring up a medical cannabis too. It does go into these issues of illegal market, illicit market, et cetera. Our sector is built on medical cannabis in BC and this compassionate piece. So I think that that's one area where I think it's about 3 weeks. It'll be legal to possess heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. I think in Vancouver, but I suspect that will be a right that other Canadians and other cities will try to take as well. So it's a major threshold that we're crossing here in terms of the way drug policy is looked at, and it's all done through a medical lens. And when you look at the cannabis review, and I think this conversation was, Jacqueline kind of offhand joke that maybe tobacco will cure cancer. Well, of course, we know that that's a joke, but it isn't a joke with cannabis, not on curing cancer, but on helping people treat their cancer symptoms. It helps people cope with all kinds of chronic ailments. And yet, if you read the Cannabis Act review, there's no mention of any medical benefits of cannabis whatsoever. It's all, especially when you compare it to booze, gambling, smartphones, fast food, etc. It's a really different approach. So I think that getting back and reminding people that cannabis does have these extra benefits to the point about it being unique. And we can lose sight sometimes in the recreation market that there is this other piece to cannabis that our whole industry is rooted on. So, we are advocating, for example, for designated growers. We have 6,000 medical farmers in the province who have to destroy excess product. Can we get them to divert it to groups like the Overdose Prevention Society, like the High Hope Society, who are helping these addicts?
That would be amazing.
And provide them with cannabis as a safe alternative to heroin. So we take this to the provincial government, we take it to the federal government, who say they're doing everything they can for the overdose crisis, except this. They will not do this. But we've seen movement now on that, I can happy to report, in the last little while. So I'm optimistic that we might be able to hear more about the medical health benefits of cannabis, which I think can attack some of the stigmatized pieces as well. It makes the government very uncomfortable to acknowledge the medical benefits of cannabis. So the more that we can do that with data and with a lot of research, the good news is you don't have to look too far to find the research that it works, and our public health officials don't seem to want to talk about it. So I think just to remind everybody that this is still out there. We're also concerned that a lot of medical license holders now are suffering through the doctor shortage, and you need your doctor to renew your prescription and renew your grow, and you can't find a doctor for a lot of things. Find one for a cannabis license. So these are issues I think that we need to keep tabs on, because as the legal market continues to struggle, people will be looking more and more to the medical system to access their product and to be able to grow cannabis for people.
Yeah, and on that note, medical cannabis, at least in the new framework that exists within the Cannabis Act, because there is a provision for medical in that, but it's treated more or less identical to recreational. Prescriptions that you get for cannabis, it's just the only prescription you can get that is taxed in Canada, period. Like every other prescription that you receive for medicine does not get taxed. In cannabis, it gets taxed so high that often the tax can be like over 100%. Like for me, if I use cannabis medically, I want to buy outdoor organic flower. Often that sells for less than $1 for the farmer. The government is often making $1.25, $1.50 when all is said and done, with all the other markups that exist. So you're basically in that particular scenario where an outdoor farmer is getting 75 cents a gram, the government's getting $1.25. That's 200% right there. That's ridiculous that that's the tax that exists, but that's the reality today. And what that means is that in the new framework that exists, and Health Canada really is trying to push everybody into the Cannabis Act world, it means that medicine is no longer accessible, and that's not okay. So that's a big thing that has to change. Excise duty reform, taxing reform, and just medical access as a whole is a huge topics that are all, in my opinion, quite interconnected.
Well, we did see the courts reinforce that in Saskatchewan, I believe, last month. I believe that there was a voir dire ruling about medical access, and so we see courts continue to reinforce these things. And it's weird that we haven't taken this in hand and really meaningfully, actually met the requirements laid out by the Allard decision, et cetera. I feel like that's very low hanging fruit, and it's very they're very obvious things. Like storefront access for medical cannabis is a no brainer. That makes perfect sense, and that does not in my opinion impede the recreational market in any meaningful way. As Sami said, that product that you're accessing is on the internet. What if you don't have a computer? What if you don't have a fixed address or a credit card? And those are things that are obviously not top of mind for my private recreational retailers, but I think that as a sector we have to remember that legalization would not be here if it wasn't for patients. That's a fact of the matter, right? We owe this sector to people who used cannabis for their horrible diseases that many of them lost their lives in that process, but they were standing up right in front of elected officials saying this is my right to do this. And I think that the courts have said, yeah, we agree with you. And we were I think it would be an amazing opportunity if we were to expand the medical framework and increase access and have pharmacy, because these are jobs, right? This is economic development again. And also, as David pointed out, in the midst of an opioid crisis, in the midst of the move towards decriminalizing small amounts of other kinds of products, why would we not be supportive of something that we know is effective from an opioid cessation perspective? So we are, our retailers are not focused on medical, but we are very supportive of storefront medical access. That is a fact of the matter.
Guys, I've got to wrap this up in 10 minutes. So what I'd like to do is kind of give you each an opportunity to share any final thoughts. Jacqueline and David, have you guys share a bit about the Cannabis Summit that's coming up in April. Is it on 420 this year?
Close. 421. 22, 23.
Okay. A bicycle day isn't bad. And then I'll share who we have for next State of Craft, and then we'll wrap it up. So who wants to jump in first with whatever final thoughts they might have?
I just want to say thanks. Thanks for today, and also thanks for your work in bringing us all together. And I really enjoy working with all of you. And I can't say that about everybody in the industry. So it is a pleasure to, just continue working in the trenches, guys. And I look forward to what we can do in the next few weeks. It'll be exciting.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Jacqueline, David?
I will just say that, our works, the summit coming up, is part of, kind of I think an initiative on the part of a lot of people who are legacy and who joined the legal system, who really want to see the culture of cannabis preserved. Because I will spare you guys the rant, but I have a very strong personal opinion that it's an intangible cultural asset, especially in British Columbia. If you don't people, I'm always laugh, you don't know anybody in weed. Oh, you know somebody who's in cannabis. So it is a fundamental kind of underpinning of the experience of being a British Columbian. And so the conference that we're planning on hosting is a way for us to marry the reality of business and legalization with that cultural intangible space that is so important to so many people for whom cannabis is not only a product that they consume, but also a product that has been a companion to them through their lives, right? And part of their social network. So I'm really excited to continue to do that work, as well as see some more policy stuff come out of that space, because I think that the next 18 months from a policy perspective, with the federal act being open, is a unique opportunity for us as a sector to speak with one voice. So yeah, we're really excited to be leading that charge at our CC.
And I'd add to that also, not just with the federal review, but with there being this tangible shift that we felt with the BC government as well. That's a huge opportunity too.
Yeah, no, I'll thank you, Sami, for having us. Thanks to all those who participated, and just full to Jacqueline and Sarah, just amazing people to work around. It's so much fun to work with them. If anyone's listening, you know, the provincial government should hire these two ladies and make them like the leaders of the cannabis secretariat, and we would fix our problems, and we would all be good, because they're just two of the best in the country for sure. So we're all lucky to have them. And I think Sarah's event in February will be a must in the Kootenays as well. So we're looking forward to that. There'll be a few things leading up to the event. We'll launch next week, Sami, public sales for the BC Cannabis Summit. It is 21st, 22nd, 23rd. We're just wrapping things up with the hotel now, and we'll we don't want to make it too much bigger than last year. We had to make it bigger last year because we sold out quickly. There was a nice intimate feel to it, even though we had 400 or so people there. And cannabis was celebrated; it wasn't hidden. So I think that was key. And Indigenous governments were full partners throughout the event. And I think people noticed that as well. So 420 is a busy day for all of us in the sector. I think particularly for retail partners as well. So we felt that we would. And we had it over the weekend, so we felt that the Friday, Saturday, Sunday would be nice. The hotel will give us all the weekend rates. It's still on the right side of the shoulder season for tourism, and Kelowna, is one of, we talked about leadership. There's a municipality that says we want to lead, we want to be a hub.
Yeah.
And to get the full engagement of groups like Tourism Kelowna and their Economic Development Agency and so on. So we'll, through your network, Sami, distribute the link out. Members of our organizations have some exclusive early access to make sure that they guarantee their spots, but we will be doing a public launch next week as well. So watch for that. And, it's going to be a good time and a really authentic celebration of cannabis. And we had a pretty substantial policy discussion while we were enjoying ourselves as well. So we had lots of elected officials. The provincial government came, which was great. Health Canada stood us up last year, so we'll see what they do this year. CRA came, though. That should tell you something, right?
Health Canada was at the Retail Cannabis Council of Ontario's AGM, so I want that. They should come visit us.
They're coming out of the closet a little bit now, so that's good. So anyways, we'll make sure you get the information, and just thanks to everybody for their perseverance, and let's keep our fingers crossed next year when we do this. It'll be we'll be further down the road.
Sounds great. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. I'll give one quick plug to CertiCraft before we move on to telling you who our next guest is. So for those of you who don't know, CertiCraft is a company that, like I said earlier, is on a mission to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive in the regulated market. And the main way that we do that today is we have the easiest by far compliance platform for licensed producers, processors, growers. We just did our first case study with Stewart Farms out east, and we are with 2 of their employees, we're saving them over 150 hours of busy work every single month, which is pretty exciting and incredible. And we didn't realize that we had that much of a benefit for just 2 employees on their team. So we automate and digitize a lot of that kind of stuff. And if you're interested, if you are a licensed producer, please reach out. We'd love to show you a demo of what we do. Next week, we've got Mr. Dan Sutton coming back on for his second time on this show. We'll be getting into excise duty and reform and the Stand for Craft and all that jazz. Stand for Craft, which some of you guys might know as a project Dan has been spearheading around excise reform, was actually born on the State of Craft. He was a guest in September of 2021, and we were talking all about excise, and it was in that conversation that he was like, you know what? Let's do this thing. And then a few weeks later, Stand for Craft was born. So we'll get to hear about how what has come in that time, and how Dan feels about the reality of shifting excise and all that jazz. And to me, like these first 2 conversations here, this one today and this one next in 2 weeks, those are the 2 big things for me personally. Like I'm very focused on BC direct delivery, making that accessible so that distribution can be solved locally in BC, where we're based out of, and farm status as well. and then that allows the kind of the local sector to like have the local regulations enable them to emerge and thrive, and then excise duty reform at the federal level. Those are kind of the two things that I see like hampering producers more than anything else, and so that's kind of where I'm focused on. So the first two episodes were really kind of just wanting to focus on those two bigger issues, and then to kind of what David was saying about Indigenous governments, we're going to have some Indigenous governments coming on board in future sessions, February onwards, to kind of discuss their realities and why they've chosen to kind of go in different directions. So I'm really excited to start bringing more Indigenous voices into this series as well. That's it from me. Thank you, Sarah, Jacqueline, David. Really appreciate having you guys on here today. Really appreciate working with you over these past bunch of months, and really excited to see how this discussion with the government goes in a week or two. Like I said, I'm very cautiously optimistic, and I have a pretty good gut feeling about it. Thank you to those of you from government who were here today. Livona, glad to see. Wait, did I get your name right? Where is it? Livona, yeah, I got it right. Glad that you're stuck around till the very end here. Thank you for that. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with you in the next little while here. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
You guys are awesome.